In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, colorful flower beds adorned front yards, and the faint hum of lawnmowers could often be heard on lazy Saturday mornings. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, at least by face, and where nothing exciting ever seemed to happen. That is, until recently. At the center of the neighborhood's growing tension was Karen Miller, the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen wasn't just any ordinary HOA leader. She ruled the community with an iron fist, enforcing rules that most people didn't even realize existed. From the color of front doors to the height of mailbox posts, no detail was too small for her scrutiny. If your grass grew half an inch taller than the approved limit, or if you dared to leave a bicycle leaning against your porch railing, you could expect a sternly worded letter, or worse, a visit from Karen herself. Karen had appointed herself as the ultimate authority in Willow Creek, and she took immense pride in her role. She walked around the neighborhood with a clipboard tucked under her arm, jotting down notes about every minor infraction she spotted. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, and her sharp tongue made sure offenders knew exactly what they'd done wrong. Some residents found her persistence amusing, while others simply rolled their eyes and complied to avoid conflict. But deep down, almost everyone agreed on one thing. Living next door to Karen meant walking on eggshells. Amidst all this chaos lived Robert Bob Thompson, a man whose calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to Karen's fiery personality. Bob was the police chief of Willow Creek, though few people in the neighborhood actually knew that. He preferred to keep his professional life separate from his personal one, choosing to blend into the background rather than draw attention to himself. To his neighbors, he was just another friendly face who occasionally waved hello when passing by. Bob's home at 42 Maple Street was modest, but well-maintained. His lawn was always perfectly mowed, his driveway free of clutter, and his mailbox painted in compliance with HOA regulations. Not because he cared much for Karen's rules, but because it was easier to follow them than deal with her endless complaints. Despite his efforts to stay out of trouble, however, Bob couldn't escape Karen's watchful gaze entirely. Every now and then she would stop by to remind him about some obscure guideline or ask pointed questions about why his holiday decorations weren't symmetrical enough. But Bob had bigger concerns on his mind lately, namely, his missing pension. Check. It had arrived late Friday afternoon as usual, but when he went to retrieve it from his mailbox after work, it was gone. At first, he assumed he might have overlooked it or misplaced it somewhere inside the house. After searching every room and drawer without success, though, he began to suspect something more sinister was at play. The thought of theft crossed his mind immediately. Mail theft wasn't unheard of, even in quiet towns like Willow Creek, but Bob couldn't imagine anyone in the neighborhood stooping so low. Still, there was one person who came to mind: Karen. Earlier that day, Bob had noticed her lingering suspiciously near his mailbox while chatting with another neighbor. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. After all, Karen was always poking around other people's property. But now, the memory nagged at him. Determined to get answers, Bob decided to dig deeper. Over the weekend, he casually mentioned the missing check to a few trusted neighbors, hoping someone might have seen or heard something unusual. To his surprise, several people admitted they'd experienced similar problems. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who lived 2 blocks away, revealed that her Social Security check had vanished last month. Mr. Patel, a young father of 3, shared that he'd received someone else's bank statement in his mailbox just days earlier. Both incidents had been brushed off as isolated mistakes, but hearing them back-to-back made Bob uneasy. What troubled him most was how quickly Karen dismissed these reports whenever they came up during HOA meetings. Instead of taking them seriously, she blamed teenagers for vandalizing mailboxes or accused newcomers of being careless with their deliveries. Her dismissive attitude struck Bob as odd, especially since she usually jumped at any opportunity to enforce order in the neighborhood. Why would someone so obsessed with rules turn a blind eye to potential criminal activity? As Bob mulled over these inconsistencies, he remembered something else: a recent installation of outdoor security cameras by his neighbor across the street. Hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever, or whatever, had taken his check, Bob asked if he could review the footage. The camera covered part of his driveway, including the mailbox area, and its recordings stretched back several days. Sitting in his neighbor's living room, Bob fast-forwarded through hours of grainy video. Most of it showed nothing out of the ordinary: cars driving by, kids playing tag, squirrels darting across the lawn. But then, late Thursday night, something caught his eye. A shadowy figure appeared on screen, moving cautiously toward his mailbox. As the figure leaned closer, the camera captured a clear image of Karen's face illuminated by the glow of a nearby street lamp. Bob froze, his heart pounding. There was no mistaking it. It was Karen, and she wasn't alone. Standing nervously behind her was Greg, her husband, glancing around as if expecting someone to catch them in the act. They lingered by the mailbox for several minutes before slipping away into the darkness. Though the footage didn't show exactly what Karen had taken, Bob felt certain she was responsible for his missing check, and possibly others as well. Armed with this new information, Bob realized he needed to tread carefully. As the police chief, he had a duty to uphold the law, but he also wanted to handle the situation diplomatically. Accusing Karen outright could escalate tensions in the already strained neighborhood. Instead, he resolved to gather more evidence before confronting her directly. Little did he know this decision would set off a chain of events that would shake Willow Creek to its core and reveal secrets no one saw coming. Bob's discovery of Karen sneaking around his mailbox late at night left him with a mix of anger, confusion, and determination. He couldn't believe that someone who prided herself on enforcing rules and maintaining order in the neighborhood would stoop to stealing from her own neighbors. But the security footage didn't lie. It clearly showed Karen tampering with mailboxes, including his. Now Bob had to figure out how widespread the issue was and whether Karen was acting alone or had accomplices. The next morning, Bob decided to take a closer look at the situation. He started by casually talking to more of his neighbors, asking if they'd noticed anything unusual about their mail recently. At first, people were hesitant to share details, either because they didn't want to cause trouble or because they assumed it was just an honest mistake. But as Bob pressed gently, stories began to emerge. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow whose Social Security check had gone missing, admitted she hadn't reported it because she feared being labeled a troublemaker. "I thought maybe I misplaced it," she said, wringing her hands nervously. But then it happened again last month. Same thing. No check, no explanation. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, revealing both frustration and vulnerability. Mr. Patel, too, opened up about his experience. "It's not just my bank statement," he explained. "Sometimes letters go missing entirely. Other times I'll find envelopes ripped open like someone went through them and threw them back in my box." When Bob asked if he suspected anyone, Mr. Patel hesitated before mentioning Karen. "She's always nosing around," he said cautiously. "I've seen her near my mailbox a few times when I wasn't expecting her." These accounts painted a troubling picture. It seemed Karen wasn't targeting just one person. She was systematically going after multiple households, likely picking out checks or important documents that could benefit her financially. The pattern suggested premeditation rather than random theft, which made Bob even more determined to uncover the truth. To gather more evidence, Bob decided to attend the next HOA meeting. These gatherings were typically dull affairs filled with discussions about landscaping guidelines and noise restrictions. But this time, Bob planned to use the opportunity to observe Karen's behavior and see how she reacted to questions about mail safety. As expected, Karen dominated the conversation, rattling off updates about upcoming inspections and reminding everyone about the importance of keeping their properties pristine. When the floor opened for questions, Bob raised his hand. "I've been hearing concerns from some neighbors about mail security," he began, keeping his tone neutral. "Has anyone else noticed issues with missing or tampered mail?" The room fell silent for a moment as people exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Mrs. Henderson timidly spoke up, recounting her experience with the lost Social Security checks. Others followed suit, sharing their own stories until the atmosphere grew tense. Karen, however, remained unfazed. She brushed off the complaints with practiced ease, attributing the problems to outside influences. "It's probably kids messing around," she insisted, waving her hand dismissively. "Or maybe those new families down the street don't understand how things work here yet." Her deflection only fueled Bob's suspicions further. Why was she so quick to shift blame instead of addressing the real issue? After the meeting, Bob approached Karen under the guise of seeking advice. "You seem to know a lot about what's happening in the neighborhood," he said casually. "Do you think we should consider installing better lighting or cameras near the mailboxes? Seems like it could help deter any mischief." Karen stiffened visibly at the suggestion. "Cameras?" she echoed, her voice tinged with unease. "That seems excessive. Besides, I'm sure it's nothing serious. Just a few isolated incidents." Her forced smile didn't reach her eyes, and Bob noticed her fingers twitching nervously, a telltale sign that she was hiding something. Determined to catch her in the act, Bob devised a plan. He knew Karen thrived on gossip and drama, so he decided to plant a decoy letter in his mailbox, a fake memo addressed to himself from the city council. The memo claimed that the town was planning to expand parking spaces along Maple Street, a topic guaranteed to spark outrage among residents. Bob figured that if Karen got her hands on it, word would spread quickly, giving him the proof he needed. Sure enough, within hours of placing the decoy letter in his mailbox, rumors began circulating throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors whispered about the supposed expansion, speculating about its impact on property values and traffic patterns. Bob monitored the chatter closely, waiting for Karen to make her move. That evening, Bob set up a hidden camera near his mailbox, ensuring it captured a wide angle of the area. He positioned himself inside his house, watching the live feed on his laptop. Around midnight, just as he was beginning to doubt his plan, movement appeared on the screen. A shadowy figure approached his mailbox, moving cautiously under the dim glow of the streetlights. Bob's heart raced as he recognized Karen, and this time, she wasn't alone. Greg, her husband, trailed behind her, looking over his shoulder anxiously. Karen opened the mailbox and pulled out the contents, rifling through them with practiced efficiency. She paused when she saw the fake memo, holding it up to read. Even from the grainy footage, Bob could see her expression change, from curiosity to panic. She muttered something to Greg, who nodded nervously. Together they hurried away, disappearing into the night. Bob waited a few minutes before heading outside to inspect his mailbox. Sure enough, the decoy letter was gone, along with several other items he'd left inside. Among them was a blank envelope containing a note Bob had written. "This is evidence of attempted theft. Please return immediately." Though he doubted Karen would comply, he wanted to leave no room for doubt about her intentions. Armed with irrefutable proof, Bob felt a surge of resolve. He now had everything he needed to confront Karen, not just as a neighbor but as the police chief tasked with protecting the community. Still, he knew the situation required careful handling. Confronting Karen publicly could escalate tensions and damage the fragile sense of trust within the neighborhood. Bob decided to wait until morning, giving himself time to prepare for the inevitable fallout. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, Bob reflected on the events of the past few days. What had started as a personal inconvenience, the loss of his pension, check, had revealed a much larger problem affecting the entire community. Karen's actions weren't just selfish. They were a betrayal of the trust that held the neighborhood together. And while Bob understood the gravity of what he was about to do, he also knew it was necessary, not just for justice, but for the future of Willow Creek itself. Little did Bob realize, however, that confronting Karen would lead to revelations far beyond what he'd anticipated. Her motivations ran deeper than simple greed, and the consequences of exposing her crimes would ripple through the neighborhood in ways no one could have predicted. The morning after Bob's late-night discovery, he woke up with a sense of purpose. He had spent the night reviewing the security footage again and again, ensuring there was no room for error. The evidence was undeniable. Karen and her husband, Greg, were caught red-handed tampering with his mailbox. Now it was time to confront them directly. But Bob knew this wasn't just about catching a thief. It was about restoring trust in the neighborhood while handling the situation fairly and responsibly. Bob decided to approach Karen first thing in the morning before she could disappear into her usual routine of patrolling the streets for HOA violations. He wanted to catch her off guard, giving her little time to prepare excuses or deny what she'd done. Dressed in plain clothes so as not to intimidate her immediately, Bob walked over to Karen's house, which was only a few doors down from his own. Her front yard was immaculate, as always. Every blade of grass perfectly trimmed, every flower bed arranged symmetrically. It was ironic how someone who prided herself on orderliness had been secretly sowing chaos in the neighborhood. When Bob knocked on Karen's door, she answered almost instantly, her face lighting up with forced cheerfulness. "Oh, Bob," she exclaimed, clutching the edge of the doorframe. "What brings you here? Is everything okay?" "Actually, I need to talk to you about something important," Bob replied calmly, stepping closer. His tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for small talk. "Can we sit down for a moment?" Karen hesitated, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if expecting Greg to appear. Finally, she nodded and led Bob into her living room. The space was spotless, with neatly arranged furniture and shelves lined with decorative knickknacks. Everything screamed control and precision, qualities that now felt hollow given what Bob knew about her recent activities. Once they were seated, Bob got straight to the point. "Karen, I've noticed some irregularities with my mail lately." He began, watching her closely for any signs of guilt. "My pension check went missing last week, and when I looked into it, I found out I'm not the only one. Several neighbors have reported similar issues." Karen's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "That's terrible," she said, shaking her head sympathetically. "But I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe the Postal Service made a mistake or—" "I don't think it's a misunderstanding," Bob interrupted gently but firmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, opening the video footage he'd recorded the previous night. "Take a look at this." He handed the phone to Karen, who stared at the screen in stunned silence. The grainy but clear image showed her sneaking up to Bob's mailbox, rifling through its contents alongside Greg. Her hands trembled as she watched herself pause to examine the fake memo before stuffing it into her bag. When the clip ended, Karen lowered the phone slowly, her face pale and stricken. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, though her voice lacked conviction. I was just checking for community updates. You know how much I care about keeping everyone informed." "That's not what the footage shows," Bob said evenly. "And it's not just my mailbox you've been targeting. Other neighbors have lost checks, bank statements, and personal letters because of you. Why are you doing this, Karen?" For a long moment, Karen didn't respond. She sat frozen, her eyes darting between Bob and the floor as if searching for an escape route. Then, unexpectedly, tears welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I swear I didn't." Her sudden breakdown took Bob by surprise. He had expected denial, anger, or even defiance, but not this raw display of emotion. Sensing that she might finally be ready to confess, he softened his tone slightly. "Tell me what's going on, Karen. Help me understand." Karen wiped her tears with trembling hands, taking a shaky breath before speaking. "It's Greg," she admitted reluctantly. "His business failed last year, and we're drowning in debt. We've tried everything, loans, selling things, cutting back on expenses, but nothing works. Every month the bills pile up higher, and I didn't know what else to do." She paused, choking back another sob. "One day, I saw a check sticking out of someone's mailbox, a big one. I thought maybe if I took it, altered it somehow, and deposited it in our account, we could buy ourselves some breathing room, just until we got back on our feet." Her voice grew quieter with each word, heavy with shame. "But once I started, it was like I couldn't stop. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that no one would notice. But then more people started complaining, and I panicked." Bob listened intently, his expression unreadable. While part of him felt sympathy for Karen's predicament, He couldn't ignore the fact that she had broken the law and betrayed the very community she claimed to care about. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he asked gently. "There are resources available for situations like this. People who can assist without resorting to theft." Karen shook her head bitterly. "Because I'm supposed to be the strong one," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Everyone looks to me to fix problems, to keep everything running smoothly. How could I admit that my own life was falling apart? I couldn't bear the embarrassment." Her words struck a chord with Bob. Beneath Karen's domineering exterior lay a deeply insecure woman desperate to maintain appearances, even at the cost of her integrity. It was a tragic flaw, one that had spiraled out of control and hurt countless others in the process. Still, Bob knew he couldn't let sentiment cloud his judgment. As the police chief, he had a responsibility to uphold the law, regardless of personal feelings. "Karen, I appreciate your honesty," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "But what you've done is illegal. Stealing mail isn't just a violation of trust, it's a federal offense. I can't overlook that, no matter the circumstances." Karen nodded numbly, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she whispered. "I deserve whatever happens to me." With a heavy heart, Bob stood up and retrieved his phone, dialing the non-emergency line for the local police station. He explained the situation briefly, requesting backup to handle the arrest professionally. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived, at Karen's doorstep, their presence signaling the end of her reign as the queen of Willow Creek's HOA. As the officers escorted Karen outside, several neighbors gathered on their porches, whispering among themselves. Some looked shocked, others angry, but a few, like Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Patel, seemed almost sad. They had suspected Karen all along, yet seeing her led away in handcuffs brought a sense of finality that was hard to process. Greg emerged from inside the house midway through the ordeal, his face ashen with guilt. He tried to defend his wife, insisting that the idea had been hers and that he'd only gone along with it out of fear. But Bob cut him off, reminding him that participation in a crime made him equally culpable. Both Karen and Greg were taken into custody, leaving behind a stunned and divided neighborhood. Later that evening, Bob sat alone in his living room, replaying the events of the day in his mind. He felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice had been served, but sorrow for the damage Karen's actions had caused. The HOA, once a source of pride for Willow Creek, now felt tainted, its reputation tarnished by greed and deception. Yet amidst the turmoil, Bob saw an opportunity for growth. The incident had exposed cracks in the foundation of the community, but it also highlighted the importance of trust, accountability, and mutual support. Over the coming weeks, he planned to work with residents to rebuild those bonds, starting with open discussions about how to prevent such incidents in the future. As he turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Bob reminded himself that even in the darkest moments, there was always hope for redemption, and that sometimes confronting the truth was the first step toward healing. The arrest of Karen and Greg sent shockwaves through Willow Creek, leaving the neighborhood in a state of disbelief. For years, Karen had been the self-appointed guardian of order, the person everyone turned to for answers, or feared crossing. Now she was gone, her actions exposed to something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The revelation that the woman who preached rules and perfection had been stealing from her own neighbors was almost too much to comprehend. In the days following Karen's arrest, whispers spread like wildfire. Neighbors gathered on front porches, in grocery store aisles, and during morning walks to discuss what had happened. Some expressed anger, calling Karen's behavior unforgivable. Others felt pity, wondering how someone so outwardly confident could crumble under pressure. And then there were those who simply felt uneasy, questioning whether they truly knew their neighbors at all. Bob, meanwhile, found himself at the center of the storm. As the police chief, he had done his duty by arresting Karen, but as a resident of Willow Creek, he felt the weight of the community's emotions. People looked to him not just for answers, but for guidance on how to move forward. At first, Bob tried to keep a low profile, letting the dust settle before addressing the situation publicly. But it soon became clear that silence wasn't an option. The tension in the air was palpable, and if left unchecked, it could tear the neighborhood apart. One evening, Bob decided to host an informal meeting at the local community center. He invited everyone who wanted to attend, emphasizing that the goal was to foster open communication rather than assign blame. The turnout was impressive. Nearly every household sent a representative, filling the small room with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Bob stood at the front, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I know this has been a difficult time for all of us," he began, his voice steady but warm. "What happened with Karen shook our trust, not just in her, but in each other. I want to make one thing clear. None of you are responsible for her choices. What she did was wrong, and she will face consequences for it. But now, we have a choice to make. We can let this divide us, or we can use it as an opportunity to strengthen our community." His words resonated with many in the room, though some remained skeptical. One man raised his hand hesitantly. "Chief Thompson, how do we even begin to fix this? Trust doesn't come back overnight, especially when someone like Karen, who acted like she cared about us, turned out to be, well, a thief." Bob nodded, acknowledging the validity of the question. "You're right. It won't happen overnight, but it starts with honesty. If any of you have concerns or feel unsafe, please speak up. Let's create a space where we can share openly without judgment." He paused, scanning the room. "And let's also remember that while Karen made terrible decisions, she wasn't acting alone. Her husband Greg was involved too, and behind their actions was desperation. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it reminds us that people sometimes make poor choices when they're cornered." This sparked a lively discussion. Mrs. Henderson shared how she had once considered asking Karen for help after her social security check went missing, but feared being labeled a nuisance. Mr. Patel admitted he'd avoided reporting his tampered mail because he didn't want to cause trouble for his new family. Slowly, others chimed in, revealing similar fears and frustrations. It became evident that Karen's intimidating presence had silenced many, preventing them from seeking support when they needed it most. As the conversation unfolded, Bob realized that rebuilding trust required more than just talking. It demanded action. He proposed several initiatives aimed at improving neighborhood safety and communication. First, he suggested installing additional security cameras near communal areas, including mailboxes, to deter future incidents. Second, he recommended forming a neighborhood watch program, giving residents a sense of ownership over their community's well-being. Finally, he encouraged everyone to participate in regular check-ins, ensuring no one felt isolated or overlooked. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Even those who had initially been hesitant warmed up to the idea of working together. By the end of the meeting, a committee had formed to oversee the implementation of these changes, with volunteers stepping forward to take on various roles. Bob couldn't help but smile as he watched the transformation unfold. What had started as a scandal was now becoming a catalyst for unity. But the road to recovery wasn't without its challenges. In the weeks that followed, tensions occasionally flared. Some residents argued over the placement of cameras, while others debated the logistics of the neighborhood watch schedule. There were moments when it seemed like old divisions might resurface, but Bob remained steadfast, reminding everyone of the bigger picture. "We're stronger together," he would say whenever disagreements arose. "Let's focus on what unites us, not what separates us." Meanwhile, updates about Karen's case trickled in. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of mail theft and fraud, citing financial hardship as her motive. During her court hearing, she broke down in tears, apologizing profusely to the judge and to the residents of Willow Creek. While her remorse didn't erase the harm she'd caused, it humanized her in the eyes of some neighbors. They began to see her not just as a villain, but as a flawed individual who had made catastrophic mistakes. Karen's sentence included probation, mandatory financial counseling, and community service. Though she wouldn't be returning to Willow Creek anytime soon, she vowed to make amends in whatever way she could. Her husband Greg received a lighter penalty, given his lesser role in the scheme, but both were barred from holding positions of authority within the HOA, a decision that brought quiet relief to many residents. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA disbanded temporarily, allowing the neighborhood to reevaluate its purpose and leadership structure. When discussions eventually resumed about reinstating the organization, the tone was markedly different. Gone were the rigid rules and nitpicking. Instead, the focus shifted to collaboration and mutual respect. A new leader emerged, a soft-spoken woman named Lisa, who emphasized inclusivity and transparency. Under her guidance, the HOA slowly regained credibility, becoming a force for good rather than fear. As summer gave way to fall, Willow Creek began to heal. The security cameras proved effective, deterring potential mischief and providing peace of mind to residents. The Neighborhood Watch program flourished, bringing neighbors closer together as they took turns patrolling the streets. And perhaps most importantly, a culture of openness replaced the former climate of secrecy and intimidation. People felt comfortable reaching out to one another, knowing they wouldn't be judged or ignored. Bob played a key role in this transformation, using his position as police chief to advocate for stronger community ties. He organized workshops on male safety, hosted coffee mornings for residents to connect, and worked closely with local authorities to implement additional safeguards. His efforts earned him widespread admiration, though he remained humble, insisting that the credit belonged to the entire neighborhood. By December, Willow Creek bore little resemblance to the fractured community it had been just months earlier. Holiday lights twinkled merrily in windows. Children laughed as they built snowmen in driveways, and neighbors exchanged warm greetings as they decorated their homes. It was a stark contrast to the tension and mistrust that had gripped the area earlier in the year. Reflecting on everything that had transpired, Bob couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught everyone, including him, an invaluable lesson. That even in the face of betrayal and chaos, communities could come together to rebuild stronger than before. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, nor would it ever be. But it was resilient, and that resilience was its greatest strength. As the year drew to a close, Bob sat on his porch, sipping hot cocoa and watching the snow fall gently over Maple Street. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace, not just as the police chief but as a neighbor. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew Willow Creek would face them head-on, united by the bonds they had forged through adversity. And that, he thought with a satisfied smile, was worth celebrating. As winter settled over Willow Creek, the neighborhood began to feel like a different place entirely. The scars left by Karen's betrayal were still there, faint but visible, like cracks in a once pristine sidewalk. Yet, instead of crumbling, under the weight of those cracks, the community had learned to mend them, to fill the gaps with something stronger and more enduring than before. It was a quiet transformation, one that unfolded gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day, residents realized they no longer walked on eggshells when passing each other's homes. Bob noticed the change most acutely during his morning walks. Where once he'd seen tense faces and hurried footsteps, he now encountered smiles and waves. Neighbors lingered longer at their mailboxes, chatting about weekend plans or sharing recipes for holiday cookies. Children played freely in the streets again, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. Even the trees seemed to stand taller, their bare branches reaching skyward as if celebrating the renewal of spirit in the community. But this newfound harmony didn't come without effort. In the months following Karen's arrest, Bob worked tirelessly to ensure the lessons of the past weren't forgotten. He organized monthly town hall meetings where residents could voice concerns, share ideas, and celebrate milestones together. These gatherings weren't mandatory, but attendance was consistently high, a testament to the growing sense of camaraderie among neighbors. At one such meeting, Bob introduced a Neighbor of the Month award, recognizing individuals who went above and beyond to support others. The first recipient, Mrs. Henderson, whose courage in speaking out about her stolen Social Security checks had inspired many to do the same. The security measures Bob helped implement also proved invaluable. Cameras installed near communal areas deterred mischief, while the Neighborhood Watch program fostered a culture of vigilance and cooperation. Volunteers took turns patrolling the streets, armed with flashlights and walkie-talkies, ensuring everyone felt safe. What started as a practical solution quickly evolved into an opportunity for connection. Walks that might have been solitary became social outings, with participants stopping to chat or exchange updates about ongoing projects. Perhaps the most significant shift, however, was in how people treated one another. Gone were the days of judgmental glares and passive-aggressive notes slipped under doors. Instead, kindness became the norm. When Mr. Patel's car broke down one icy morning, 3 neighbors showed up within minutes to help push it out of the snow. When Mrs. Henderson fell ill, a group of women organized a meal train, delivering homemade soups and casseroles to her doorstep daily. Even small gestures like holding open a gate or offering a kind word carried extra weight, reminding everyone that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Karen's absence loomed large in these early days of recovery, but not in the way one might expect. Rather than dwelling on her crimes, the community chose to focus on the lessons her actions had imparted. Her downfall served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of accountability. It also highlighted the need for empathy, something Karen herself had lacked when she let her desperation override her morality. Bob often reflected on this duality. While Karen's behavior had caused immense harm, it had also forced Willow Creek to confront its vulnerabilities and weaknesses. In doing so, the neighborhood emerged stronger, more united, and better equipped to handle future challenges. Bob couldn't help but wonder if Karen, too, might someday find redemption. Though she remained far away, serving her probation and attending counseling sessions, Bob hoped she would eventually recognize the value of the community she had once sought to control, and perhaps even contribute to it in a positive way. Spring arrived sooner than expected, bringing with it a fresh wave of energy and optimism. The HOA, now led by Lisa, resumed its activities with a renewed sense of purpose. Meetings were shorter, friendlier, and more collaborative, focusing on initiatives that benefited the entire neighborhood rather than nitpicking minor infractions. One of Lisa's first projects involved creating a community garden, where residents could grow vegetables and herbs together. The idea took off immediately, with volunteers of all ages pitching in to prepare the soil, plant seeds, and build raised beds. By summer, the garden was thriving, providing fresh produce for families and fostering yet another avenue for connection. Bob watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. As the police chief, he knew his primary role was to protect and serve, but he also understood the importance of nurturing trust and goodwill. Over the past year, he had done just that, balancing authority with compassion, leading by example, and encouraging others to do the same. His efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. At the annual block party in June, residents surprised him with a heartfelt speech and a plaque engraved with the words, "For guiding us through darkness and helping us find the light." Though touched by the gesture, Bob insisted the credit belonged to the entire neighborhood. "I may wear a badge," he said during his brief acceptance speech, "but it's your strength, resilience, and willingness to come together that truly make Willow Creek special." As the evening wore on, Bob mingled with his neighbors, laughing and reminiscing about the past year. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to relax completely, letting go of the weight he'd carried since discovering Karen's crimes. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Life rarely was. But he felt confident that Willow Creek was ready to face whatever came next. That confidence deepened later that summer, when news reached the neighborhood that Karen had completed her probation successfully. She had taken steps to rebuild her life, securing a modest job and volunteering at a local charity. Though she hadn't returned to Willow Creek, and likely never would, she sent a letter to Bob expressing her gratitude for the second chance she'd been given. Enclosed was a handwritten note addressed to the community, apologizing once again for her actions and pledging to use her experiences to help others avoid similar pitfalls. The letter sparked mixed reactions. Some residents felt uneasy, unable to forgive Karen fully for the pain she'd caused. Others, however, saw it as a sign of progress, a reminder that even those who stray can find their way back if given the opportunity. Ultimately, the consensus was clear. Karen's apology marked the final chapter in a story that had tested Willow Creek's strength and resolve. By the time autumn rolled around, the neighborhood had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. New families moved in, drawn by the warmth and unity that defined Willow Creek. Longtime residents welcomed them with open arms, eager to share the lessons they'd learned over the past year. The community garden expanded, the neighborhood watch grew in numbers, and the HOA continued to innovate, introducing programs that prioritized inclusivity and sustainability. Bob stood on his porch one evening, watching leaves swirl in the breeze as the sun dipped below the horizon. He thought about how far Willow Creek had come, and how much farther it could go. Challenges would undoubtedly arise in the future, but he knew the neighborhood was prepared to meet them head-on, united by the bonds forged through adversity. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, it never claimed to be, but it was resilient. And in that resilience lay its greatest strength,